investment tax paradise that it has become. At least if you listen to politicians or accountants, it is exactly that, a tax paradise, and this is one rare occasion that I'm going to have to agree with them. My name's Justin Beaton, for those of you who don't know who I am. I'm a licensed investment manager at Sequoia Asset Management. Just to go through a few things before we kick off. Tonight it's just general information only. What that means is I haven't considered your personal investment circumstances when I put together this presentation. It's pretty much just all factual information about superannuation and hopefully increasing your education excuse me, about why superannuation is so good to accumulate assets for the long term. Sequoia Asset Management is a holder of Australian Financial Services Licence. There's sample strategies, case studies and examples. I'm actually going to go through one big case study. I think the easiest way to learn about some of the key contribution strategies of superannuation is by referring to an example. Following on from this presentation, by all means, if you haven't done so already, make sure you download a copy of my book, Making Super Sexy, and all the details, or a lot of the details, are covered in that book. If you do have to leave us any time early, by all means contact Sequoia Superannuation. Sequoia Asset Management looks after the investments, specifically superannuation is one of our specialties, and Sequoia Superannuation are experts in establishing and managing self-managed super funds. So what we want to learn tonight, key learning objectives first and foremost, is how to take control of your super, what should become your biggest asset. The 4 key powerful superannuation strategies. 3, how to accelerate the returns within super by using leverage or borrowing money to invest. And how you can borrow money to buy not just shares but also direct property within super. Before I get into the case study, 1st of July it became effective a few changes to the superannuation laws. One was actually the tax rate. Tax rate has changed for many Australians inside of superannuation. Previously, the tax rate for concessional contributions, so the majority of contributions are made through your employer, the 9% of your salary goes into superannuation. The tax rate for those contributions in the past has been a flat 15%. Now, though, the government makes it even more attractive for some Australians in that if you earn less than $37,000. If you earn less than $37,000, the government will give you a cash rebate to put back into your super fund, which is the equivalent of the tax you pay. So the 15% tax that you'd be paying on contributions into super, concessional contributions, they will just give you an immediate cash return up to $500. So if you earn less than 37 grand, now the tax rate inside of super is effectively 0. Going to pay no tax legally, superannuation is a place to do it. If you earn over 37 grand, the tax rate's 15% up until $300,000. There's one way that I suppose the government has made it not as attractive for many, is that for people that earn over $300,000 a year, they've increased the concessional contributions tax to 30% for those people. What that does is for all Australians now, each and every Australian in the country, by putting money into superannuation as a concessional contribution, it is a lower tax rate than their marginal income tax rate. Concessional contribution caps have been reduced from 50 grand down to 25,000. They're looking at introducing the increase in the cap to 50. That didn't happen. So concessional contributions is up to $25,000. They're the main changes, but when you look at retirement, once you reach pension age and you're retired, tax rate for all income earned in superannuation is still 0. Capital gains tax inside of super, 0. So you effectively buy a property today and wait until you retire, pension phase. If there's huge capital gains in the next 10, 20 years, whatever it is, the capital gains tax rate is 0. You pay no capital gains tax. If you accumulate that asset in your own name, though, you would be paying at your marginal income tax rate less than 50% capital gains tax exemption if you hold it for longer than 12 months. So again, when you look at all aspects of income, the money you take as a salary as opposed to putting into superannuation is by far a lot better vehicle to accumulate assets for the long term. So I want to go through the key superannuation strategies which will accelerate the amount of money you have in super. As I said earlier, the easiest way to do that, I think, is using a case study. So Peter and Anne. Peter and Anne is a person or two people that I refer to in all the books, and many of them are case studies. I use this same photo. They were a real-life client, and they still exist as a client. We have changed their name for privacy, and that photo on the screen is not Peter and Anne. They're by no means that good looking. They're a lot uglier than that. But let's go through the key characteristics of Peter and Anne. Peter is 45, Anne is 40. Got a home worth 650 grand. The mortgage on that home is $260,000, and they've got 15 years remaining to pay down that home. They're paying principal and interest. The combined super value is $190,000 when you look at both of them. When they initially set up their super fund, they didn't really show any interest in superannuation. In fact, it just defaulted to the default option, which was conservative. So it's been pretty conservative, the investments, as to where they've allocated that super proceeds. Their income details: Peter's income before tax is 95 grand and works part-time, earning $28,000. So if you look at the two, their combined annual tax is $26,850. After-tax income, what they get in their back pocket is $96,150. Why that's important is their number one goal for retirement is to maintain that after-tax income. So they don't need to, in fact, they can enhance their lifestyle in retirement, and they don't need to reduce their spending habits. Peter wants to retire in 15 years. He'll be 60 then. Anne wants to retire at exactly the same time. Because she's 5 years younger, she'll only be 55 when she's retiring. As I said, they want to maintain their after-tax income of $96,150, and they will also want to own their own home outright without any mortgage. So key assumptions. Let's make a few assumptions in the forecast, and then we'll go through the key steps that Peter and Anne need to make to ensure they reach their goals. First and foremost is average conservative investment returns around 5.9% after fees over the last 25 years. Growth investment returns after fees is 8.5%. We're going to assume that for the next 15 years. Income returns in retirement, 6.5%. Borrowing rate, 7% on their home. And superannuation rules as of the 1st of July 2012 apply for the entire period. As we all know, fortunately, one of the biggest problems with superannuation is the government keeps playing around with it and keeps changing the rules. But hopefully, like in the past, the majority of the steps the governments have made to change superannuation has made it even more attractive as an asset class to build for retirement. And the 2012 tax rates apply for the entire time as well. So my objective is to grow Peter and Anne's assets so they can draw a $96,150 income from forever. To do that, we have to build a fair asset class above their principal home. Obviously, their principal home of residence, they can't derive an income, so we need to build their income-producing assets to be quite substantial to be able to draw an income of close enough to $100,000. If we decide to accumulate assets, if Peter and Anne decide to accumulate assets in their own name, they need to generate close enough to $1.9 million in income-producing assets above their principal home to be able to draw a $96,000 income on an annual basis without eroding any of that principal. In superannuation, though, we only need to accumulate 1.4 million. The reason why it's so much less to derive the same after-tax income for Peter and Anne inside of superannuation as opposed to its individual names is simply because the tax rate is a lot lower. If Peter and Anne develop or buy property, develop $1.5 million worth of net assets inside of property and able to draw down an income in their own name, they'd have to pay tax on that income, irrespective of their age, if it's held in their own name. If it's held in superannuation, though, once they reach retirement age and pension phase, any income drawn from their super is tax-free. This makes a huge difference. This is the key advantage that superannuation has over holding assets in a company or even in individual names. It's like the Olympics. It's like racing Usain Bolt, but he gets to start at the 100-metre line and you run it from 40 metres from the finish line. Now, if you're like me, you probably need a bit more of a head start than 60 metres. But in this game, superannuation now has exactly the same investment choices available as what you do in your own name, pretty much anyway. So the Usain Bolt can be invested in your in super as it can in your own name. That's a pretty good analogy I thought of at the time. And during the presentation, if you've got any questions, by all means, put it into the box, the chat box. Hopefully I have increased my webinar skills where I'll be able to see it, but don't hold me to that. So that's what we need to do. Obviously, it's a lot easier to reach their goals inside of super. Now, number one strategy that the majority of Australians do is they do nothing. They sit back and they think, it'll be right, mate. I've got 15 years until I reach retirement. I'll think about it when I get there. So they generally wait till they're 64, 5 minutes away from retiring and go, shit, I want to retire. And they realise that they can't because what the government has increased the entitlement age to the pension. And secondly, if they can, they've got to substantially reduce their standard of living in retirement. If they do nothing, just leave it in conservative investment returns, Peter and Anne are actually going to have a super value of $640,000. So not too bad. But their retirement income, if they're able to earn a 6.5% income from their super, is $41,000. They will own their own home outright because they'll be paying principal and interest for the next 15-year period. So it's not that bad. It's slightly above the pension for a couple, but it's well short of their target, which is to generate $96,000 a year in income. So it's a big reduction in standard of living when they have to have $1,000 less each week to live off. There's the target. So strategy number one, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, but you know what, very few Australians take advantage of it, is called the Government Co-Contribution Scheme. The Government Co-Contribution Scheme was introduced a few years back to give many Australians an incentive, or low-income earners an incentive, to put money into superannuation to save for their retirement in after-tax dollars. So if you make an after-tax contribution into superannuation, the government is willing to make some form of contribution on your behalf, provided you meet certain income thresholds. The income threshold is if you earn less than $31,920. If you make a contribution into super in after-tax dollars out of your back pocket, the government will match it, not dollar for dollar like it used to be, but they'll put 50 cents to every dollar that you put into superannuation. So 50 cents they'll put in up to $500. So let's say you put in $1,000, they'll put in an additional $500 if you're below $31,920. So for me, there's not too many investment vehicles out there that offers you a 50% return immediately, let alone guaranteed. Well, the government co-contribution does. It's a guaranteed 50% return on your investment, guaranteed by the government straight away, immediately. It's a phenomenal scheme that was introduced, and you should take advantage of it. In fact, it's that good the government has reduced it from $1 to 50 cents, but it's still pretty high. So only if you earn over $31,920, but provide you earn less than $46,920, the government will make some form of contribution. It won't be 50 cents for every dollar, it'll be less than that, but they want to give you incentives to save for retirement. If you earn more than $46,920, unlucky. You can't benefit from the government co-contribution scheme. If you listen to Wayne Swan, he'll tell you that because of all the tax concessions, you've already got a huge incentive to put money into superannuation already. That's what he tells us anyway. Government co-contribution scheme. So if you go back to our example, Anne was working part-time earning 28 grand, so because she earns less than 31,920, she's entitled to the full government co-contribution. So what we're going to do is have Anne put $1,000 a year into superannuation in after-tax dollars. When she puts $1,000 into super in after-tax dollars, the government will invest another $500 into Anne's super fund as a co-contribution. They said immediate 50% gain. Giddy up. 15-year projections. If you look, the government co-contribution scheme, which many politicians debate and talk about how good it is, and accountants, but if you look at the differences over the 15-year period, that's that little green component on the chart there. So this little section here isn't really that big of a difference. If we look though, the retirement or the wealth created has been $33,000. It's cost Anne 15 grand over the full 15-year period out of our own back pocket, and we've created $33,000 of wealth. So we've pretty much doubled the money over that period, a little bit more. Additional income, which is where it makes a big difference, is that while it's cost her $1,000 a year, the additional income that can be created from those funds is $2,155. So $1,000 has cost her over a 15-year period, and she's been able to generate an additional $2,000 or more than $2,155 a year in income that would last forever. Forever. Again, they'll own their own home outright. So there's a target. So that's a government co-contribution scheme. Strategy number 2, invest in growth assets. Look, it's not so much invest in growth assets. I think the majority of Australians just don't take superannuation seriously. And Peter and Anne is exactly the same situation. They never took super seriously initially, and it just defaulted to conservative investments. The conservative returns 5.9%, where growth investments haven't been the best performing asset over the last 5 years. If you look, I've got a recent Russell report in front of me. Russell report looks at the last 25 years performance. Over the last 25-year performance, which is the long term, which lucky enough inside of superannuation, you're forced to maintain a long-term view because of the government's disciplined approach for it to be compulsory. You can't touch it until you're old and wrinkly. But if you look at the 25-year performance of different asset classes, well, if you bear with me one second, just bring it up. The return for here we go. The return for Australian shares inside of super, 11.3% after tax. That's over the last 25 years. Even if we look at the recent fall in the market over the last 5 years, residential property 10.7. If we go down to cash, 5.4% has been after-tax returns inside of cash, so slightly above inflation. So if you've got a long-term view, having a conservative investment option, while it seems safe, it's really the most risky investment strategy that you can adopt, because you face one of the biggest risks, which is longevity risk, which means that you may outlive your superannuation savings. Last thing you want to do is reach retirement and live for another 20 years and still be alive and run out of super. That's longevity risk. So what we're going to do is we're going to educate Peter and Anne so they can make an informed investment decision as to where they should invest their super fund money, so it more accurately reflects their investment circumstances. They understand that growth investments, they offer short-term risk, but they're willing to take that on because they've got so much time to ride out the ups and downs of property or share market. So 15 years, they've got 15 years before they can access their super, so they're considered long-term investors. They also require higher returns. Hey, if they sit there in conservative returns, they're not going to reach their retirement goals. They need to be proactive now, even though they've got 15 years to retirement, to ensure they're going to have enough money to meet their income needs in retirement. So for Peter and Anne, they think growth assets are more appropriate than conservative options. Case study, 15-year projections. So if you look at just changes, just a few percent, what we've been able to do is accumulate an additional $183,000 in wealth. An additional 11,000 or 12,000, close enough, of income has been generated from this strategy alone. And this has cost Peter and Anne nothing. The additional cost out of their back pocket is nothing. The government co-contribution scheme cost them about $20 a week, so it's cost them nothing. All they've done is spend a bit more time to educate themselves to be a more informed investor about where they can invest their superannuation assets. As you can see, by just a few percent, making sure it's better allocated, you go from 5.9 to 8.5%. It makes a big difference when you're looking at the wealth created. The super value is going to grow to 856 grand. But again, we're still well short of the target. Now this one, retirement strategy number 3. This is the one that's most debated, I suppose, of all of my superannuation strategies. Like in the past, if you're generally asked or ask a financial planner or accountant what the best return, risk-free return is, the majority of people will simply say pay off your home. And that's not the case for the majority of Australians. When you pay off your home, you pay the interest expense in after-tax dollars, where if you salary sacrifice that money into super, it goes into super pre-tax, where the tax rate is different. So my strategy here is to actually convert your interest on your home loan from principal and interest to interest only. Now many people do that, and of course they fall victim to having more money in their back pocket, and of course they go out and spend it. Obviously, discretionary spending, that saving, is the worst thing that you can do. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I just want you to use that cash flow savings in the most productive vehicle possible. So we're going to salary sacrifice the cash flow savings and invest it into super as a concessional contribution. Concessional contribution again means you put into super pre-tax. Let's go through the scenario. So for Peter and Ann, their current mortgage rate is $98,043. We're going to convert that to interest only, $18,200. That's that part there. So they've got immediate cash flow savings of $9,843. To earn $9,843, because that's being paid into their mortgage in after-tax dollars, Peter actually pays $6,000 in tax. So pre-tax savings is what, $6,000. So what he has to earn, what Peter has to earn to have $9,800 in his back pocket is $15,875. It's that figure here. So what Peter can do, he salary sacrifices that amount, $15,875, and puts it into super. It goes in pre-tax. The tax rate in super is 15% for Peter, so he only pays $2,381. So that gives him a tax saving straight up of $3,651. So he's now got investable money of $13,494 in this red circle here. Had Peter actually just thought, yeah, look, I've got a bit of cash flow savings, I'm going to invest and invest it in my own name, he would only have $9,843 for investment purposes. Because he's choosing to invest in super, it's the $13,494, as we can see down there. Again, this highlights the reason that, like, it's a 100-metre race, you're back at the 100-metre line and Usain Bolt is 40 metres from the finish. Superannuation is by far the best vehicle to accumulate assets for the long term for the majority of Australians, simply because of these tax benefits. So what we've done, it's actually cost Peter and Ann, out of their discretionary spending, nothing. It's cost them nothing. All that we're doing is being a bit proactive, reducing one of their biggest expenses, being the interest on their home, and using cash flow savings and putting it into super. So we're going to grow their super to 1.193 mil because of it. But because we haven't been paying off principal and interest along the way, there's still a $260,000 mortgage that will remain in 15 years. So what we need to do is draw down a lump sum out of super. Once Peter reaches retirement and the pension phase, he can draw a lump sum out of superannuation, sell assets, and pay zero tax. So we can say take out 260 grand, pay off the mortgage, which gives him a $933,000 super balance. So we've created, what, $77,000 pretty much out of thin air. Additional income, $5 grand. So we've got a retirement income of $60,000. This is where the majority of really smart and savvy financial planners or accountants usually stop. They get there and then they convince you that, hey, we're not paying off the mortgage anymore. So your discretionary spending, Peter and Ann, is actually not much less than where you were previously. But Peter and Ann are a bit more savvy than that, and they go, no, 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 our goal is 96 grand and your goal is 1.5 mil. So what else have you got for me? Final part. We're still short of our target. First and foremost is borrowing inside of a super fund. Now, recently the laws have been changed inside of superannuation to enable you to borrow money to invest inside of superannuation. And for me, this is the biggest milestone inside of superannuation that the industry has ever seen. By enabling you to use borrowed funds, you're going to have a lot more money invested in the marketplace. Obviously, with more money invested in the market, whether it's residential property or commercial property or the share market, it means when the asset class increases in value, your returns are going to be accelerated, provided you get a return above the cost of borrowing, of course. However, if the asset class falls in value, borrowing is a double-edged sword in that it magnifies the losses on the downside. So it's a very powerful tool and can be very dangerous if used very aggressively and without any knowledge. First and foremost, to borrow within super, you do need to establish a self-managed super fund to do so. At the moment, there's over 33% of all Australians have their super money managed in a self-managed super fund. It's the fastest growing sector in the industry. The reason why that's the case, I believe, is that the majority of people just fed up with the poor performance inside of super. Sick of fund managers taking huge fees and delivering very little. They believe that with a bit of education they can make better investment decisions inside of super. And for me, look, I agree with you. With a little bit of education, you too can make better investment choices inside of super than those so-called professional fund managers. what are we looking at? You should seek independent advice. And when you're looking at borrowing inside of super, there's certain conditions. I'll go through those conditions in a moment. When looking at setting up a self-managed super fund, I'll go through the fees associated. Another big step is that, or another big myth inside of super is that you need a lot of money to set up a self-managed super fund. I think that's a big myth and a bit old school. Like in the past, accountants would charge up to $5,000 to set up a self-managed super fund and then charge around $5,000 a year ongoing, which meant that you need $150,000 to $200,000 to justify those fees inside of super. Now though, thanks to back office efficiencies, online reporting, all those sort of things, the costs of setting up a self-managed super fund and managing it have come down considerably. I'll go through those in a moment. If we're talking about borrowing inside of superannuation, it can be considered a very good strategy for younger, more aggressive investors inside of super. So back to Peter and Han. Of course, they need to achieve higher returns. They're happy to borrow within super. Now, they're happy to use a 50% LVR. LVR stands for loan-to-value ratio. 50% means that if you've got $100,000 in your super fund, you borrow another $100,000. So the loan is 50% of the total superannuation asset, which would be $200,000. So Peter and Ann are also aware that gearing is to be effective. A return is required above the interest cost of borrowing. So they're aware of all of the risks as an informed investor should be, but they're happy to use gearing because that's the way they've already accumulated wealth, which is by utilising gearing for their principal home of residence. This is the difference, the purple section on the chart. If we introduce gearing, now the interest expense we've assumed here is 7%, and the return we've assumed is 8.5% after fees. So I'm not telling you that it's going to be making 15% per annum or 15% per month. I'm using 8.5%. And if we look at the average return over the last 25 years, according to Russell, the average return for shares is 11.3% and residential property 10.7% inside of super. So I'm using a conservative rate of return at 8.5%. If we look at that over the 15-year period, the wealth created for this strategy alone is, well, what are we looking at? 1.6 million is what they're going to have inside of superannuation. 1.6 million. Again, it's cost Peter and Ann nothing out of their back pocket. They've just introduced gearing into their investment strategy. So if you look through all of these key differences, what we had, the government co-contribution scheme really made bugger all difference over the whole period. You look at changing the investment profile from conservative to growth, made a bit of a difference. You incorporate converting to principal and interest, or to interest only from principal interest on your home. All these things make small differences on their own. The true big difference to superannuation, which is why I believe it's the biggest change in superannuation, which makes it so attractive, is the introducing of gearing. As you can see, the introducing of gearing accelerates the returns in superannuation at a phenomenal rate, provided the return is high. So provided you take a long-term view, then gearing could be considered a sensible strategy inside of superannuation. Let's look at the key steps of borrowing inside of super. One, you can borrow to buy shares. You can borrow to buy direct shares. In fact, the borrowing rate, the LVR, the amount that you can borrow, is anywhere between 50 to 100% of the share purchase price inside of superannuation. There's been some new products that have been introduced. Some of them I've been involved in helping develop with JBG Structured Investments. Others that the banks have come out, which will lend you 50% or 100% of the asset value, the shares, to go buy those shares directly. So it's an easy way to gain leverage inside of your super fund is to do it through shares. The shares are loaned just through simple limited recourse loans. Another one which obviously we've kicked ass when you look at our target in comparison to where we ended up when we introduced gearing. So Peter and Ann are obviously pretty happy about the result. Let's look at borrowing to buy property inside of superannuation. Now my core expertise is shares and superannuation. Now though, when you can borrow to buy direct property inside of superannuation, it is very attractive. Like after all, the majority of Australians have accumulated their wealth inside of for retirement by buying property directly through their principal home of residence. On my grandparents, even my mum, the majority of her assets that have helped her accumulate assets for retirement has been done through her principal home of residence. The only way that my mum was able to buy direct property was through borrowing money. She borrowed, what was it, 80% of the property value many, many moons ago. And through the growth, like she borrowed, it was a $300,000 property. She borrowed 240 grand, she had 60K. 20 years later, that property is worth $1.5 million, and she's paid off the loan, of which she can sell and then drive an income to pay for her retirement on top of her super fund strategy. So buying direct property and using gearing has been a huge way and huge source of many Australians to fund their retirement in the past. Now it's inside of super though. It's the tax rate is zero. So let's look at borrowing money inside of super. So you can borrow money to buy both residential and commercial property. There is one restriction in that you need to meet the sole purpose test. The sole purpose test means that buying the property must be for the sole purpose of providing an income for the trustees in retirement. What that means is that you can't live in the house, you can't buy it up the coast on the beach and travel up there and use it as a holiday house. You can't do any of those things. It must be for the sole purpose of investing and providing income for retirement. You can buy a residential and commercial. The rates the banks are willing to lend is a bit different. You can borrow for residential property up to 80% of the property value. So I know if you're looking at a $400,000 property, then your contribution needs to be 80 grand. You put 80 grand and borrow the $320,000. So by introducing gearing inside of superannuation, now direct property is within reach for many, many more Australians. Like in the past, you needed 400 grand to go buy that property. You need to come out with the entire cash. Now with the introduction of gearing, many more Australians can access that asset class. Commercial property, you can borrow up to 70% of the property value. So for borrowing arrangements inside of super, whether it's shares or direct property, the loan needs to be provided on a limited recourse basis. This is the only restriction, or the main restriction, that the government has imposed in superannuation borrowing. They do not want at any stage a super fund to be owing money. So what limited recourse means is that the bank has no recourse on any other assets of the trustee or any other assets of the super fund, the self-managed super fund, other than the asset itself that is held security for that loan. So let's say in your self-managed super fund you have shares, you also have a property held in a self-managed super fund of which you have a borrowing arrangement on. If the property price falls in value substantially, the bank cannot have any recourse on your shares held inside of that super fund. The only thing they've got hold as recourse is the property itself. Other lending conditions: the borrowed funds can only be used to acquire assets allowed in super. So again, it needs to meet that sole purpose test. Asset acquired needs to be held in trust. So the self-managed super fund receives all the benefits or the beneficial interest in the asset. So all income of the property goes towards the self-managed super fund. Self-managed super fund has also the right to acquire legal ownership of the asset when a future payment is made. And then any recourse that the lender has under the loan agreement is limited to the asset the loan relates to. So when it comes to property, to be able to meet those conditions, you need to go through certain processes. First and foremost, to buy direct property and borrow inside of super, you need a self-managed super fund. As I said, self-managed super funds are not that expensive anymore. That is the biggest myth, as I said before. So we can help you establish a self-managed super fund, and rather than being $3-5 grand like it has been in the past, Sequoia will do it for nothing for you. We'll do it for nothing. We'll look after all the paperwork, and it won't cost you a cent. There's two types of self-managed super funds. One, the classic self-managed super fund, and then the mini SMSF. Now, the mini self-managed super fund, I believe, will revolutionise the superannuation industry. Before I get onto that, I'll just talk about the classic. It's designed for people that have more than 100 grand in super. Remember, in a self-managed super fund, you can have up to 4 members. So if you all have 25 grand each, you, your wife, your brother, your sister, pull all the super funds. pull your super money together, create one self-managed super fund, and you've got 100 grand, one lot of fees. So if your super balance is greater than 100 grand, a classic self-managed super fund could be considered suitable. We'll look after the complete compliance for reporting, audit, ATO lodgement. We'll do the whole thing. You get online access, tells you the value of your shares, your property, all that sort of stuff on a day-to-day basis. We take all the hard work away from managing your SMSF and ensuring it's compliant. So you get full online reporting. The fees, so again, the setup is nothing, usually costs $14.95. The ongoing fees, which covers all of the cost, is a flat fee of $2,580 per annum. Ongoing. Includes all the audit, the ATO lodgement, all the compliance fees. That's it. The only thing you have above that is the investments. Now the mini self-managed super fund. Now this is designed for people that aren't quite, haven't got quite 100 grand in the super. So it's between 30 and 100 grand the combined super value. So if you and your wife have got 25 grand each, you're 50k, you might consider a mini self-managed super fund. Again, we'll do all the compliance work. The only real thing mini about the mini SMSF is its fees. We'll do the full online reporting, all that sort of stuff, free setup. Why this is going to revolutionise the investment markets or superannuation industry is that it's a percentage fee rather than the flat dollar amount. So it's 1.75% per annum plus $10 per month per member. What that works out to be is that if you've just got a traditional super fund, let's say you're in a retail super fund now, the average MER or management fee, super fund admin fee in a retail super fund is over 2%. So if you're sitting there with 50 grand now paying 2%, it's going to cost you exactly the same. In fact, you might be saving fees to set up a self-managed super fund under the mini structure and go take control of the investment decisions inside a super. Now obviously with less than 100 grand it's very hard to go out and buy property directly. If you've got a $400,000 property for instance, you need to come up with a contribution of 80k to buy that property plus all the bank fees, charges and all that sort of stuff. So the mini SMSF isn't really suitable to go out and buy property directly. You generally need more than 100 grand plus to be able to buy property directly. So it's certainly worth discussing the super and giving them a book to your brothers and sisters, because if you pull them and get over 100 grand, then you might consider it suitable for all trustees. So they're the two differences in the fees and the structure. Going with the mini SMSF, setting up a self-managed super fund is within reach for a lot more Australians. Certainly for younger Australians that are becoming more and more astute when it comes to investment choices, it gives you the capacity and cost you a lot less than what a traditional super fund has cost in the past. So first and foremost, to buy a property inside a super, you need to establish a self-managed super fund. Again, we can do that. Secondly, you need to, after setting up a self-managed super fund, you need to roll over your existing superannuation to your SMSF. Again, we can help you with all that. Again, you need to obtain a loan approval or pre-approval for your self-managed super fund. We can specialise in organising all those loans for you. We basically do everything. We take all the obligations off you, hold your hand through the process, through compliance, through the tax side of things, and all that you need to do is go find a property. Pretty simple. So you source a property, that is your obligation. Go find it. We can look at acquiring it inside a super and then look at putting together the certain arrangements required inside a superannuation to borrow to fund it. What you do need for property for borrowing is to establish what's called a bare trust or a special trust. Now, I'm about to go through the complex structure that is involved. It's pretty easy. It's just the trust that the property is held in to ensure that the super fund retains beneficial ownership and that the super fund can borrow. We'll look after all that. You get final loan approval. Betting of legals will help you with that, and also in discussions with the banks. Finally, the property is settled. You buy the property after all those steps are complete. Then you just collect rent and hope the property goes up in value over a period. Ongoing administration, accounting, bookkeeping, financial preparations, auditing, all of that sort of stuff we look after. So we make it pretty simple. We've removed all the hurdles, all the obligations. Like obviously as a trustee you've got obligations to ensure that you remain compliant, but with our assistance we're helping you along the way to ensure that hopefully you don't make any mistakes in that process. So this is the self-managed super fund and the bare trust arrangement. So you look at the property is held in the trust. You lease the property to a tenant. The tenant pays the rent. It goes into your self-managed super fund bank account. Self-managed super fund bank account pays for repayments. The lender or the bank lends you the money in the self-managed super fund through a limited recourse arrangement, and we're away. So while that chart looks pretty complicated, it's actually pretty simple once you get the processes in the way. And again, that's what we specialise in. So if you look back at Peter and Ann, the case study, Peter and Ann, they've paid off their mortgage. They've created an additional $1.7 million in wealth than they would otherwise had when they started 15 years earlier. They can draw a retirement income of actually $109,000 from their superannuation, completely tax-free, without eroding any of their super fund. So that means that at 1.75 or $2 million, whatever the super fund was at the maturity, they sit there, and when they pass away, that superannuation can be passed on through their will to the beneficiaries or their kids. Peter and Ann have paid off their home. They have an additional $41,000 in discretionary cash to spend per annum. That's in disposable income. So that's almost $1,000 a week to live a life of abundance. $800 a week to just go play golf, go travel, do whatever they want. To maintain their income in retirement, Peter and Ann can actually